hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon. Welcome to this live discussion on sustainability in practice, a catalyst for change in your business and the world. It's a question, actually, and we're trying to address it today. We're here, of course, to discuss the importance of sustainability within the telco industry and the wider ecosystem, of course, the current challenges the industry is facing, and also the innovative solutions to a pressing range of environmental and societal issues. I'm Charlotte Kahn. We're together for about 1 hour. We'll leave 15 minutes at the end of the session for Q&As. It's not too early to start thinking of relevant and great questions for our wonderful panelists here today, and it's probably time for me to introduce them. So please welcome to my left, Justine Rowe, who's Chief Sustainability Officer at Telstra. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Sue Preston, who's Vice President, Advisory and Professional Services at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Hello, Sue.
Thank you.
We are also joined by Alexandra Foster, who is Director at BT Division X.
Thank you.
And Jeni Panhorst, Vice President, Network and Edge Group at Intel Corporation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So a few stats to open today's discussion. According to a report by BCG, telcos generate about 1.6% of global emissions. Now, of course, it's a lot less than energy or transport. However, if left unchecked or unmanaged, the industry could be responsible for up to 14% of emissions by 2040 as data usage increases, of course. Now, the industry aims to be net zero to reach net zero by 2050. So how do we get there? So Jeni, I'd like to start with you, please. How can the telco industry really take the lead and use technology to reduce emissions?
Well, it's actually a really exciting challenge, and I think looking out into the to the audience and being a part of an all-female panel is pretty cool to start with. But actually being in the telco and tech industry, we have such an opportunity to lead. And so what does that mean? I actually think it means a lot about collaboration, which I think we'll hear a little bit during the discussion this afternoon. But at Telstra, we have started by looking into the emissions from our own network. So getting our own house in order, if you will. And we have been working with Ericsson for a number of years to actually look at energy efficiency in our radio access network. There's always more to do, but seeing the change that we've had over recent years has been really phenomenal and heading in the right direction. Of course, we also look at things like our heating systems, our cooling systems, using IoT and data and analytics as to when to sort of turn things on and when to turn things off. And I also think there's an amazing opportunity for us to not only educate customers about what is possible through the use of technology and through the use of our solutions, but actually getting them excited about what's in their own hands that they can then enable the change for themselves. So I think there are a number of things that we can do, Charlotte, and it's just exciting to be a part of an industry that is taking bold climate action. And as you would have heard from the start of the kickoff at MWC, the shift is moving. There is more things that we can do around collaboration, enablement, and making sustainability and sustainability strategy core to what we actually deliver.
Thank you very much. Now, Alexandra, when it comes to sustainability, BT is definitely a leader. In fact, you've won many accolades, including the latest. You're part of the Clean 200. Tell us more.
Yes, Clean 200 is our latest accolade, and we're really proud as an organisation that BT really has been a leader in sustainability. It's very much part of our DNA as a company. You know, we have a manifesto that all employees know, and we put that out externally. Those are our goals to get to net zero on carbon emissions by 2031, to be able to have that circular economy by 2041. And those are hard targets that we've put in. But, you know, for us, it's recognised externally. And as you said, you know, the Clean 200 organisation looked at 8,000 different big multinational companies on a global basis, and actually we were in the top 200 to be able to receive that award. So, yes.
Well done, BT, of course. Now, Jeni, how are telcos customers reducing their overall carbon footprint using communication technology? What can you tell us about it?
Well, we spend a lot of time listening to folks like Alex and Justine about the problems that they're facing in their networks. And what we hear from the operators is they really represent a pretty substantial portion of their country's overall electricity consumption. It's not necessarily an enviable position to be in, and they're very focused on how do they improve that. And so we're focused on innovating technologies in order to make that happen. It certainly is what we drive in terms of our own ingredient innovation in the compute technologies that we deliver in our processors and the rest of our overall product portfolio. And there are a couple examples of that we've launched recently and here at MWC within, for example, our Xeon processor portfolio, our 4th gen Intel Xeon, we're able to deliver 2x capacity gains generation on generation for vRAN workloads. But we also, very similar to what you were saying, Justine, we like to put power in the hands of our customers. And so it's not just about innovating the power efficiency of the products that we're creating, but it's also empowering our customers with capabilities that they can take advantage of in their infrastructure. And so another announcement that we did here this week at MWC is something called Intel Infrastructure Power Manager, which is focused on adding intelligence into the infrastructure to better utilize power management technology that exists in our processors to adapt use of those technologies to changing traffic demands within the network. And so it's about providing that real-time control by monitoring KPIs and delivering that. And we can do that in 5G Core. We also have technologies to drive improved power management within vRAN deployments. And so that's really exciting. But we also really focus on partnering with our ecosystem around innovating unique system design in order to improve outcomes in the infrastructure too. And so when I think about our collaboration with HPE and our broader ecosystem of partners, there's actually a really exciting demonstration down here in the HPE booth, just below where we're seated for the panel, by a partner called Isotope that's focused on precision cooling. And so when you look at the challenge of not just powering the compute systems themselves in telco infrastructure, but actually powering the cooling systems, that's a tremendous challenge. So how do we innovate novel technologies to make that easier to solve the overall energy efficiency problems that we're facing? And so, I could go on. There's many technology examples in terms of how we're focused on driving innovation, but partnership is key.
Justine, I can see you nodding. I'm sure you have many examples to share.
Yeah, I do, but I really like the real-time monitoring and putting the ability in the customer's hand to actually influence the outcomes. And if you think about that from an industry specific level, in Australia, a couple of the key industries where we're seeing some of those technologies play out is in the ag sector, in mining, of course. But certainly, if you're a farmer on a remote farm and you don't have to traverse your whole farm to be checking on water levels or checking on things in using IoT and AI and telematics, it's in your hands back at the farmstead. So there's some great use cases that are enabled through tech, and there's the use cases are endless, and it's just about applying them, I think.
And that partnership is key, where you talk about taking that data. That's exactly what we've done at BT. We've got a carbon dashboard that we give out for customers and for ourselves to have a look at what's happening on the network, being able to take that data and then use machine learning and artificial intelligence to be able to say, actually, what do you want to do with those workloads? Should you be moving those workloads, and where should you be putting them?
Yeah, I was going to say that at BT you also have many stories, many examples of how you are leveraging all this technology to not just reduce carbon emissions, but, and you've mentioned it, actually help with agri-tech, water management, and you're working with utilities, aren't you, very closely?
Yeah, we're doing a lot in utilities at the moment, particularly the water sector. We've got the biggest IoT project in Sheffield. For those of you that aren't British, do come to England and do go to the north of England up to Sheffield. We've got the world's largest IoT project there, looking at water courses and doing polling. We've got new regulation in the UK looking at polling, taking that real-time data to be able to improve water efficiency so that we don't have the leakage that we've got. Similarly, in Yorkshire. The other thing that we've done is quite a nice community collaboration there. Actually, we needed to do some polling of the reservoir there, so we put in polling stations at the reservoir, but we also managed to put in some new masts so that actually the community got much better connectivity as well. So community, connectivity and IoT being able to play out in the sustainability agenda.
Thank you very much. It's time to hear from Sue.
Yes.
Yes, right now. So Sue, which parts of the network use the most energy and how can this be reduced or even eliminated? Let's talk about networks.
Yeah, so I think if I look at the most intensive, it's the compute processors. So I think that's where it comes back into the ecosystem and driving the innovation with with Jeni from Intel. But I think the other thing is that looking at the innovation that can be driven on the edge as well, then looking at consumption of 5G, private, there's different things that we need to look at in order to reduce that energy consumption. And I think just adding to the liquid cooling, that is pretty key as well on how you're cooling down that processing power, which in turn reduces the energy consumption as well. But I think you've got to look at the end-to-end journey and what metrics are you measuring in order to drive those efficiencies. And I think traditionally we are quite mature in measuring energy efficiency in data centres, so PUE. It's where that innovation comes in with AI, machine learning, all of the other things that we can do that can be more predictive.
Alex, can you share some examples as well? How at BT are you looking or assessing some parts of the network in order to reduce energy consumption and do better on that front?
Well, definitely in the data center. We've worked really hard to reduce our emissions in the data center, working with our partners. We've talked a lot about partnership and ecosystem. That's absolutely key. So clearly, data and data centers are one of the areas we absolutely have to target on that. We've also looked at where we've got our energy from, and so actually we've gone 100% renewable as well on a global basis in terms of how we've taken that. And then in terms of the network, we're rolling out new networks. Those new networks, whether that's in the mobile networks or in the fiber networks, modern networks are much more efficient. When you've got much more efficient networks, actually, it's much better from an energy basis as well. So actually, from all of those bits, from data centers to new networks, creating efficiencies, actually get a better outcome for energy.
And I think on that as well, because I think if organisations look at, sometimes it's, well, if I replace it, do I break down, rebuild? There's efficiencies that can be driven across repurpose.
Yes.
But then also taking into advance what you do need to replace and refresh to drive those efficiencies. And I was just thinking about your comment on water, conserving water. So in the water industry, leakages are the biggest issue. But then it's predicting with IoT,
yes,
the growth of weeds, because creating cracks in pipes, these are just some of the things that you learn when you're looking at IT for sustainability. But, we've got to stop, we've got to conserve water, we've got to look at renewable energy as well, which is absolutely critical on solar, wind and water, ocean.
Well, that's why we've been doing quite a lot with visuals and IoT together, and then being able to take the visuals to actually apply predictability around it. So the two of those things coming together actually is very nice.
And Alex, you're director of BT Division X. It's a division dedicated to emerging tech. So tell us more about the importance of automation and emerging tech like AI, let's say, in the drive for energy efficiency.
So I talked about some of the platforms that we've got. Well, actually, the data coming into those platforms, particularly for customers as well, when they're looking at their networks, using our networks, they take data and actually having a look at the signals to see, do we have anomalies? Are there anomalies coming through that we wouldn't expect from a historical basis in terms of energy usage? So signaling as to why that is happening. Then having a look about, well, actually, are you using your energy in the most efficient way? And if you aren't, making some recommendations. So the combination of machine learning, looking at what's happened historically, and then making some recommendations, and then moving forward from there.
But I think you hit a point there as well. So if you think of the edge, if you've got global data centres that at the edge you're consuming all of that data and then it's got to be sent miles to a data centre. So I think that again on some of the edge use cases can help. And I think the visualization is absolutely critical, because that's an area of driving an all-up sustainable future. Human capital, how are you visualizing all of those analytics of what is part of driving your sustainable future as well?
Spot on.
I think also looking at the whole end-to-end holistically. So when we were talking before about putting in the new technology or new networks that might be driving less energy usage, we also need to think about what we're doing with decommissioning the legacy and how we might be reusing or recycling or refurbing if it's possible. And I think just actually looking at the whole holistic journey and the role of the circular economies, I think, is really key too.
Packaging.
And packaging, of course.
And it's getting people into that mindset.
Yeah.
You know, the mindset of the consumer, the mindset of, you know, in a B2B business, and that hasn't historically been there. You know, we've done an awful lot of work, particularly, you know, in mobile handset recycling. You know, we've done a lot of work on that, trying to get that mindset that is something that you do. You know, and we need to get it in a business sense as well, because people haven't quite got there in the same sense in business.
I know, so you have a lot to say about mindsets and changing habits, but we'll save that conversation for a little bit later when we talk about creating a culture of sustainability. But Jeni, I just wanted to go back to the importance of automation and AI in order to drive efficiencies. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I look at it through a couple different lenses. We've talked a bit about, you know, operating the infrastructure more efficiently, and if I, you know, click down into that a little bit in terms of how we work with the system and solution providers and the operators as well. You know, I talked a little bit before about the technology that we equip our ecosystem with that takes advantage of power management technology within our processors. It is all about monitoring system resources, whether it's the processor itself, whether it's other system resources, but also really doing that in such a way that it's reflective of the workload that is being run and specific to those applications. So it is looking at the KPIs like throughput, like latency, packet drops, and examining those, understanding what those watermarks and thresholds are, and being able to ramp up and ramp down resources dynamically in order to both achieve, you know, really important SLAs and performance KPIs in the network, and be able to deliver on exponential growth in terms of data traffic that needs to be serviced by worldwide networks, but doing so in a way that's much more energy efficient. So before, it actually used to be a bit of a compromise in terms of choosing between performance and energy efficiency and power management, and now it can be an and, right? It's not an either or, it's something that we can choose to prioritize together. And so I think that, and all of that is possible through automation, and some of those are more complex data sets and analytics that ultimately will benefit from machine learning and AI technology as well. But the other thing, and this has been touched upon, I think, by a lot of the other folks as well so far, is who we serve, right? And so it's not just what we do to leverage automation to add efficiency into the infrastructure, but and really impact our footprint, but it's also about the handprint effect that we have in terms of the industries that we serve, and driving improvements in a number of other global challenges. The energy industry has already been mentioned. This is an area that we focus on as well. And when you look at the ability to, and really the need to move to green energy, smart grid technologies, support more incorporation of renewables, moves from centralized to distributed types of infrastructure, bidirectional power flow, there's all sorts of innovation that's required. One example of an area where we've driven some innovation is around substation virtualization and automation. And so we've had a lot of really key learnings there in terms of helping the energy industry transform. And Charlotte, you mentioned it as well in terms of, contribution of the energy industry in terms of overall global carbon footprint. But I think that when you look at that set of challenges together, it's actually really interesting if we can understand, the needs of the energy industry and the transformation of what's happening there, coupled with what's happening in transformation of 5G technology, the build out of edge computing, and that intelligence that empowers that handprint effect. We start to be able to understand how can we actually innovate these side by side and actually create carbon responsive infrastructure where we can move workloads in response to where energy is in greatest capacity, right? And we know that there's a lot of variability when we talk about also use of sustainable energy sources. And so I think that really learning from all those industries simultaneously allows us to build out the most sustainable infrastructure across the board.
Yeah.
Oh, go for it, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think 'cause it was just fresh in my mind. So if we think globally, there are different challenges that organisations face. And I look at scarcity of resources. But there's definitely one thing that humans can't predict, and that's the weather. So from an AI ML perspective, if we're looking at solar, looking at all of the renewable energy that needs to be driven, but then more importantly, the impact of a major disaster or, hurricane that is taking out core infrastructure. So therefore, how are we conserving some of that consumption? So I always look at AI for good. And then looking at the, sort of supercomputing and the power of data AI and machine learning, achieving things that humans can't, or getting there faster. That's the way I look at things.
And we connect for good.
We connect for good, yes. And that's why it's a collective, the ecosystem has got to come together. And I think with, if anything, sustainability is the thing for me, that looking across that ecosystem, it's everybody's responsibility. So I think then with the technology and with innovation, and then as part of, your employees looking at those new ideas that are going to make a bigger impact. Access points, is it more effective to turn them off? How are you being automated across some of the energy efficiencies that can be driven?
Well, if all of us on this panel don't get it right today, there won't be a tomorrow, will
There won't be tomorrow, yeah.
Sobering thought.
Sorry.
Now, Justine, we've talked about efforts to get your own house in order, assisting clients, customers, etc. But what about looking at the overall supply chain, because that's what it's going to take, right? So how can telcos work with their vendor ecosystem to ensure a sustainable supply chain?
Well, I think my fellow panel members have really been heading in that same direction, that it's actually all of us collaborating together. And I do find in the sustainability space that there is much more of an appetite to share learnings and to grow together. It's not me winning, it's actually us all supporting and helping the planet. And I think that is really exciting. There's always a bit of a hard edge. So when we think about our supply chain, we need to be clear about what we're actually trying to drive. What outcomes are we trying to deliver? Build them into the contractual framework and the performance framework, of course. But then it's also about that collaboration part. So actually understanding and enabling and finding tools together that we can innovate and collaborate together. I think there's the blunt stick without the actually trying to find a way through is actually missing the point. And so we also work with Jack in terms of the audit in terms of our supply chain. And for those that are less mature, so our big suppliers are already well on the journey, but not all suppliers are at the same tier. And so for the ones that are less mature, there's an ability through CDP, through our collaboration through CDP, actually, again, enabling the tools for the less mature suppliers to understand what is within their control, to find the key elements to focus on.
Jeni, how can we create more sustainable supply chains?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Justine just said, in the sense of, this is too big of a problem for any one of us to solve on our own. It requires that end-to-end collaboration. I actually, really like the definition of Scope 3 emissions, in that it basically forces all of us to hold each other accountable. My Scope 3 at Intel includes all of you. It probably includes all of you in this room and all of us, at the FIRA here at MWC. And likewise, your Scope 3 includes me as a supplier at the, kind of at the beginning of that value chain. And so it creates this collective problem that we all have to solve. We can kind of trace those threads through a number of different examples. If I, kind of use a common example that I've been using so far around power management technology, I can innovate technology in my processing ingredients, but it doesn't matter at all if Sue and her team at HPE doesn't enable the right settings in the BIOS and the software and the platforms, or our software partners across the ecosystem don't do the same thing with respect to their software offerings, the solutions that they're delivering on top of HPE's platforms, or that Justine and Alex are not, in their infrastructure deciding to deploy those solutions and enable that type of real-time automation. So that's just one example of a way that we have to stitch together all of these different aspects of deploying new technology in order to achieve sustainable outcomes. Likewise, I expect them to hold me accountable for the way that I and we at Intel are operating innovating in terms of the way that we manufacture semiconductor products that we deliver to the ecosystem. We'd like to talk a lot about energy. I know that's a big focus in terms of, overall impact and carbon footprint. And it is absolutely something that we need to continue to drive. It means, setting those net zero targets. For Intel, we've set a target of 2040. We continue to improve, energy efficiency of our overall operations worldwide, increase use of renewables across our manufacturing facilities, across our office facilities. But it also means looking at other aspects as well. I live in Arizona in the U.S. We care a lot about water in the desert. It's definitely a key concern that needs to be addressed, and it's a key concern at Intel as well. And so we focus a lot on water conservation, restoration, reclamation. We focus on returning to our local communities. We've achieved actually 99% of returning to local communities the freshwater usage that we have, and we continue to focus on things like replenishing groundwater and watersheds as well. And then also waste. And there's been some discussion of circularity and a number of different ways to achieve that. As a company, we've achieved, we're down to 5% waste to landfill. Our goal is 0% by the end of this decade. And so there's a number of areas where we continue to strive as a company that I expect you to continue holding us accountable to in a variety of different ways. But again, I love that shared accountability and the fact that, it is an enormous challenge, but it is something that if we hold each other accountable, then that's the way we're going to make progress.
And since we're talking, unless Sue, you want to follow up
I
on
just
this?
wanted to add, because again, I agree with everything. And I think if you look at science-based targets and you look at how you're challenging some of those metrics across organisations and your supply chain, I think also with the UN Sustainability Development Goals as well, how that aligns with, ethical sourcing. Yes. So I think sometimes people you talked energy, it's more than energy, climate. There are other elements that can be measured within that whole supply chain. But then I always bring a sense of humour into things, because I was looking at Packard tea bags, scope 3 and on supply, but you can't really control how many cups of tea I have and how much electricity I'm using. Anyway.
That's a very British perspective, I must say.
Yes.
Now, I was going to ask you, since we're talking about the supply chain, about changes to procurement practices, for instance, because they're important to deliver that change across the whole chain. So any views on that, Alex? How do you do it at BT?
Well, I don't think we've had an RFP from a customer recently that hasn't had sustainability as one core section that we've had to fill in. So that sets the expectations. Our customers expect us to behave responsibly. So hence, we do have our manifesto that we've gone out with, but it is a set expectation now. So customers on a global basis, we transact business in 180 countries, and the majority of the RFPs that we've received actually have got sustainability in there. So that's what our customers expect of us. Similarly, when we are looking out the other way, we expect the same of our partners and our suppliers. And when we're starting to have a look at new partners out there, looking at the new tech innovators. If anybody's gone out to Hall 8 here at MWC, there's a lot of startups, there's a lot of innovation out there. And actually, when you start to have a look at those new players coming in, those new players can actually help all of us innovate. We work with a green tech platform that's working with universities across the UK and across the world, and that's bringing in new providers, new suppliers who have got sustainability absolutely at their core.
And I think it's key with the reporting. So again, you have to prove, and I think there's, again, on a global perspective, there's different maturity in different areas of where RFPs or business is being lost. So organisations that are not driving forward. And I think it's helping customers on their journey. That's one of the things that I've seen, to where they start, and then how can they calculate and what should they be asking their suppliers, which we can collectively help guide.
And that, we've come up with an index for customers, and so customers can see where they are on our carbon index. And on the back of that, we can work with them to work out how they can improve themselves on their index. standing. And so actually together we can improve everybody's footprint.
Yeah, and I think circular economy, because we naturally provide that reporting on what's been upcycled and repurposed versus disposed.
Sue, earlier you talked about mindsets.
Yes.
And I know it matters to you because you do a lot in terms of change management, etc. So how can we ensure that best practice is shared in industry as we drive to deliver that net zero vision?
I think that you need to drive a growth mindset within your organisation as far as the transformation is concerned. I think if you're creating a habit, it takes 30 days, to create, 60 days to create a habit, 90 days to change a lifestyle. And we all need to be curious. And I think that if in organisations, there's this fear, I don't know the answer, where do I go? So I think that we've got to drive that culture of curiosity to go find out and help and work with each other to drive an impact, because we have got one planet and we're all responsible.
Alex, how do you share best practices across the industry?
How do we share best practices across the industry? Well, we collaborate, telcos together in terms of what we're doing and learning from each other. There are various boards that we all belong to be able to share that best practice. Really talking with our customers again, we talked about actually learning together about how we can do it. And then from an internal point of view, we've said sustainability is at our core. We've been doing it for a very long time at BT. So actually, when we look at building refresh, looking at how we're bringing everything in, actually everybody's asking, well, what does this mean? How's this going to improve us? So actually, from a people point of view, it's absolutely embedded in all of us as employees, that actually to be a BT employee is to be a sustainable employee. From a community point of view, we work with all of our partners to be able to learn from each other, but also to share what we are doing. And then from an from a customer point of view, we obviously work with them on all of the different platforms that we've got to help them too.
And there's a huge appetite in the employee base to actually do the right thing.
Yeah.
Most people are actually on the how can I help rather than being dragged kicking and screaming. So I think sometimes it's almost like making sure that those great ideas can be funneled into something that can actually make change rather than sending people off in different direction. It's having the green shoots and having the ideas, but then setting the clear strategy about where those ideas can funnel through to.
We need to have more discussions around culture, but I want to backtrack a little bit and ask you, Jeni, about how we can make sure that best practices are aligned or aligning the business's goals with IT's objectives and day-to-day operations.
Yeah, I think transparency is key. There are a lot of, I think up here we represent companies who've been really innovators and role models in terms of providing transparency in our practices and what we're equipping our customers with for quite some time. And so that role modeling creates, I think, a little bit of positive peer pressure, in each of our respective portions of the value chain that I think has created kind of a positive spiral effect in dealing with this challenge. I think that also now there's commercial pressure. We've talked about it, a lot in terms of accountability and the comments that have been made around RFP, RFQ processes and setting expectations, not just putting the questions in the RFQs, but actually factoring that increasingly into the decision-making process, not choosing suppliers, not choosing vendors unless they meet certain goals in terms of overall sustainability objectives from a supply chain standpoint. So that commercial pressure is creating, I think, more motivation. There is pressure being created by regulatory motivations as well, right? And so I think that so in response to that, right, in response to those various motivators and incentives, that the best practices come in a number of different ways. They come through, and several of them have been mentioned so far already. They come through sharing in industry bodies. They come through, being able to co-innovate on solutions. And then, very often we're solving a very isolated, specific problem in a particular domain, and then we find ways to scale that out to a broader set of customers and industries. And so I think that we really have opportunities across the board in order to continue to drive innovation to solve sustainable outcomes.
So going back to Telstra, because it's very important. Alex, I was wondering if you could share examples of maybe instances where you've encountered resistance to change. You've said that everyone at BT seems to be entitled and cherish that sustainability culture, but how did you get there? I'm sure it was not that easy.
No, change isn't always easy. As I said, it starts from the top down. You know, we have a manifesto. We're really proud of our manifesto. It covers all of our ESG, not just around sustainability, and then that flows down. So it flows down from the top. You know, the top are modelling all of those behaviours, modelling those KPIs, and actually you can start to see that through the organisation. You know, we have regular teach-ins on what we're doing. You saw Sarwar on the film when we were opening. He's leading our sustainability as an organisation, and Sarwar does a huge amount of teach-ins internally, you know, in our various sort of networks, so that actually everybody gets to hear directly from Sarwar about what we are doing. Sometimes hearing about how we are connecting for good actually then makes, you know, first of all, it makes all of our colleagues proud as an organisation, but also you can start to see the dial shift. You were talking about KPIs. And actually, once you start to see the needle start to move, people then have oh, right, well, actually, I should do that myself. Or actually, if I do that, it'll make a little bit of a difference. And so knowledge, sharing, and everybody modelling those behaviours are the things that we've managed to make the change.
And I think you hit something there, because again at HPE it's all from the top, so of how that's been driven, and then every senior leader, there's like certain training and that is mandatory that, you know, people need to go on, and then there's different initiatives. But I was reflecting when you were talking as well, because some of driving that inclusive culture, some of our innovation quests have created the most fantastic ideas around sustainability that you wouldn't even think of. So I think that is proof that as it drives through the organisation, so similar to the manifesto.
And that comes back to your co-creation and collaboration that you talked about when I talked about our green tech platform, and where you have sustainability for good. I know one of the innovators that we worked with on the green tech platform is a company called IOPT. It's an IoT platform for social housing, to improve sustainability, to, you know, be able to take all sorts of indicators from a social housing point of view, to be able to do social good and sustainability and tech for good all at the same time.
But I think it is fair to say, where you started, that change is hard. And so, you know, I think that we've had the opportunity to kind of embark and mature on the journey, but it is really hard to get that momentum going at the beginning. And whether it's top down or it's a KPI, it is continual storytelling and engagement, and employee engagement, customer engagement, supplier engagement. That full ecosystem is key.
The magnitude of the challenge that we're facing is so massive that it really requires moonshot goals. There's, you know, I think not a single company that I've talked to that has set, you know, for example, their net zero targets with with a complete plan in mind of how they were going to achieve them, whatever the target is, how near term or further out in the future. And I think it's, you know, it matches the magnitude of the challenge, you know, the magnitude of that moonshot goal. And so, you know, a lot of this in terms of driving the right culture and driving the right outcomes is about setting, you know, an aspirational target, but then also just driving good business practice and operational practice in order to just create that plan, establish all the way down through the organization, where is it that we can drive impact. You know, just one example of maybe that, you know, kind of in action from Intel's perspective is, you know, we certainly have set our own net zero targets, and you know, we talk a lot about CO2. When you think about semiconductor manufacturing, there are other contributors to greenhouse gas emissions that are used in that process. And so a lot of the changes that need to be driven in our industry, not just in our company, but in our industry, you know, there are changes that have not been invented yet. And so one of the commitments we made right alongside making our net zero goal was to was a commitment to drive innovation in the industry for new green chemistry in order to ultimately achieve those objectives by that target of 2040. And I think that that's just one of many examples that any of us could cite. But I love this idea of people are motivated by moonshots and by aspirational targets because realistically we employ innovators and people who are excited about really having purpose behind their work.
Yeah.
And there really honestly could be no greater purpose than ensuring the future in this manner.
Yeah, I was going to highlight the fact that when you create a culture of sustainability, you don't just address environmental challenges and get closer to net zero. It's also a way to address many other ESG challenges. I mean, companies are facing so many of them, including recruitment and retention, for instance, and engaging the workforce. So creating that culture, Sue, and we've talked about it before, really helps create that sense of purpose.
And I think with, there's lots of different initiatives in governments around the world as well, but there's a skills shortage. We know there's a skills shortage. So levelling up, building digital skills for the future, that's all part of it as well. But you've got your early career, but then you've got other things that you can do that's driving that enablement within the organisation and driving a sense of purpose. And that's what I enjoy, because then I think it's about how are you upskilling, and somebody that, may not be data literate or, building those skills to think differently of what they can achieve. And I think it's physics as well. I love physics, but it's just a case of how you bring all of that together with the innovation and you're driving that inclusive culture. It's not one person's element to fix, is it?
No.
And I think coming together with the customers and partners, and I call it the ecosystem, that's where we learn the most.
And it's also having the most vulnerable as part of what we're trying to solve for as well, whether that's from a climate perspective or a social perspective. There are so many people that are digitally excluded. So even if they do have connectivity passing their where they live, they can't afford to access it, and they don't know they don't have the skills to access it either. And so the focus on digital inclusion is something that's really top of mind for us in terms of our broader ESG strategy. And in Australia, it's a pretty spread out place. It's hard to get to all of the communities. But our purpose is to connect everyone to thrive. So that's everyone. That's not leaving out the hard to reach people. And I think that's really important as part of the broader ESG strategy.
Very much so, and it's part of the UN
Absolutely,
Development
it's
Goals
SDGs.
anyway.
It's right in there.
The skills piece, though, is so critical.
Yes.
I mean, all of us love STEM on this panel, so it's easy for us to say. But it absolutely has to start back in the classroom, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I know for us at BT, we do barefoot computing. Right there at the sort of the junior level. Then we look at our tech program and our tech for good, and we've got a program around skills for tomorrow as well. And so working right the way up from primary school to universities about trying to get people excited about this, the excitement of technology and sustainability coming together. And if we can get the excitement about it, and then we can get the skills around it, actually we'll foster, innovation, and we will foster a whole new set of talent to come in, and hopefully we can solve it. And for anybody who's thinking out there about joining us, it's a great career. So you should definitely come on and do it.
Thank you very much, Alex. Unfortunately, it's time to wrap up this discussion and ask our kind audience to share some of their questions with us. But before we go, I was thinking of maybe sharing 3 steps, let's say, that telcos could take and companies could take right now to become more sustainable, and maybe some commitments too. What will you commit to today to become more sustainable? Justine.
Start with me. Okay, so I think what telcos can do is actually be really clear about what they're trying to drive. So be very, very clear on your expectations, and then actually map a way to achieve them. and then being transparent with how you're actually going. So if you're doing well, great. If you're not doing so well, you're still being transparent with your progress, and you're making sure that you are bringing, it's the collaboration that I think is really important. You might not be able to solve it all on your own, but bring others in on the journey. What am I going to do differently? I just think this is my first time at MWC, and there is so much opportunity that's been before my eyes in terms of collaboration opportunities. So I'm going to leverage those networks and see what I can continue to learn, Charlotte.
Thank you very much. Sue?
Yeah, and I think I'd be curious to go out and really check your own ESG reporting. So if I meet a customer, that's the first thing I do, or partner, and have a look at the website. So again, brand matters.
Yes.
That's the first thing, because then that can give a view of where you go and where you talk to internally. My personal commitment is, as always, to help anyone. So if people want to reach out, and I'm always, time is one of the precious things that you can give, but it's a precious thing to give on such a important matter.
I think we're very, very aligned. It's very hard to say anything that's different from a pure telco point of view. But I think one thing that all telcos might struggle with is that, I know certainly we've got that struggle, that we want to try and get as much of our fleet to be electric as possible. But the infrastructure, we need the infrastructure to come with us, and part of that is around, we need the wider ecosystem to collaborate, and I think that other telcos can come together. Let's try and solve the fleet issue together. So I think that's one thing that we can all do together. From a personal point of view, again, I think just like you, there is so much that we can all learn. We're all on this learning journey. None of us have got the answers yet, and so a continual commitment to learn, to improve, to solve, so that actually we do have a world tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, many of us either have sustainability as part or all of our roles, but, ultimately any of us in a position like that, our goal should be to work ourselves out of that job, because sustainability, as many people have said already, needs to be a mindset. And so realistically, sustainability is everyone's job here in this room and on the live stream. And we just need to ensure that, if you don't have sustainability as part of your core objectives and priorities for 2023 and beyond, start now. That's just, I guess, my ask to, whether you're in a telco or part of the broader value chain, there is a way that you can contribute, a way that you can learn and set a priority that will help drive positive outcomes. My particular commitment, ultimately Intel, it goes back to our role as a technology supplier to this industry, and my day job is driving our product portfolio in compute and processors for our network infrastructure and edge computing markets. And my goal is to ensure that technology is equipped to drive and deliver the performance and the services that the telcos need, but in a way that is as energy efficient as possible and helps them achieve their overall objectives from a sustainability standpoint. So I will continue plugging away at that goal every day.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi, thank you very much for joining us today. My question's for my colleague, Susan. So, I've been really surprised, candidly, because I end up recycling some of my equipment and working with our HPE Financial Services organization. And candidly, I was quite shocked to see some of the dollars flow back in. Can you kind of comment on what we're doing there and how your organization works with financial services to make kind of people reinvesting in a greener approach, a doable reality?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question, Norm. I think that if I look at HPE Financial Services as part of the HPE GreenLake strategy, there's a number of things that customers do. So there's the repurpose and upcycle, but more importantly, your customers are challenged with how they refresh some of their legacy and heritage. We actually can inject cash back into those transformational and refresh programs, which you have seen. So I think looking at the end-to-end value, if we're delivering sustainability as a service, whatever that is as a service in order for customers to innovate and transform, then that way we can reinvest in driving those transformational journeys. And then you only pay for what you use.
Any more questions?
So first off, great panel. Learned a lot today. I don't have a question for just a particular person, so feel free to jump in. But there's a lot of excitement here at MWC. Certainly, first day, second day, lots of energy. So my question's along those lines. What's it going to take to move faster here, right? What do you need? Because you all represent particular steps in the value chain. What's it take to really accelerate things?
That's a great question, actually, because the title of this panel is a catalyst for change. So what will be the trigger to get this properly started?
I think for me, it's people have got to commit within their own organisations and committing personally. My personal journey started 4 years ago when I agreed to cover for my leader at the time. And I was forced into some things in the deep end of what could be achieved. But I think it's down to individuals and to be making people accountable. So if you're going into your internal organisation or into your partner ecosystem organisation, it's driving that execution and accountability because we haven't got time. We haven't got time.
I think that creating economic ties to sustainable outcomes is really key. We had one kind of naturally happen fairly recently when we had spikes in fuel prices and energy prices, and that made, what may have still been confined to ESG initiatives for a number of different entities become very pressing economic issues that needed to be addressed. And so I think that really is a key towards driving, again, I talked a little bit about different types of motivation. Those economic motivations are really critical as well. And one way to do that is to make sure that we're pivoting the metrics that we care most about to carbon-based metrics wherever possible. So, we might have, measured things in, if we talk about energy efficiency, we might have measured things in watts before, but measuring things in tons of carbon really sheds new light on the types of problems that we're ultimately trying to solve that take into account all of those end-to-end sustainability impacts. And so I think that really, truly taking the step to fully align economic incentives with sustainable outcomes is an important catalyst.
And Jen, just to add to that as well, because I just was thinking, if you come back to brand and organisations, there's research that's been done that you're 2.5 times, organisations that are adopting sustainability with their digital transformation are going to be the strongest performers. So I think from, again, that economic impact and measure, when it's affecting shareholders, value, those are the things that will be driving action at the top.
Absolutely.
And really having a look at your infrastructure, what's legacy that's not efficient, see how you can modernise. I've already talked about what we're doing as a telco, rolling out modern fibre networks, modern mobile networks, really looking to see how you can transform your organisation with the right infrastructure, which will then solve your digital transformation, but it will also drive your sustainable transformation at the same time.
Any questions? Any more great questions? There's one at the back.
Thanks. I'm not sure if it's a great question, actually, but it is a question.
Your best, Sean.
Is there how much sharing of information do you, especially as telcos do, on the energy efficiency side? So, if Telstra finds a really cool water cooling technology supplier, is there some way you can share that information with BT or Voda or, all your other telcos? Because that seems to me a really sort of quick and easy way of moving things along, because you're not really competing in that regard.
Mm. And I think also what the GSMA are driving. Yes. Yeah, I was just going to say that, being part of the GSMA network, I think actually, that we're pushing quite hard on the metrics, developing the metrics that matter as an industry. And so I would say, incumbent on us as we're developing those metrics is actually to share what we're learning along the way. And certainly our vendors or our suppliers are doing the same. So I would anticipate that would continue to flow, but the GSMA is actually taking a leadership role, and we're all actively engaged in that.
Yeah, and from a supply chain standpoint, our partnerships with the operators are absolutely essential. And so, where we drive co-innovation, we always try to seek opportunities to transform those into blueprints that can be enabled more broadly across the industry, and drive them into scale solutions. And so that's another way that sharing occurs for sure.
You're right. We're not going to compete on saving the world. We're going to collaborate on saving the world together. So absolutely, GSMA standards, working with suppliers and partners together. You don't want to keep those. Those are things you don't want to keep to yourself. You want to share those so that we can all benefit, don't we?
Yes.
Well, it's probably time to end this conversation, this very energizing, actually, conversation around sustainability. Thanks to all of you for being with us today and for sharing your insights. And I'm sure you'll all be very pleased to join me in thanking our panelists today for their great contribution.